All right. Hello, class. Welcome back to Philosophy 1306, 2306, Ethics. We're going to be doing, what is it, Chapter 7, Virtue Ethics, Be a Good Person. Um, this chapter is a little bit different if you have the 4th edition from the 5th edition. Basically, the 4th edition, what's going on here is that, let me see, they combine chapter 7 and 8 on the 4th edition into one chapter, Virtue Ethics. Um, and in the 5th edition, they give feminist ethics its own proper chapter. So that's the major difference here between the both editions. Most of the information is more or less the same. It's just that they make a better effort on the newer edition on adding more feminist ethics approaches. That's pretty much the only difference. Okay. Let's see. So yeah, so let's begin with virtue ethics. So thus far we've talked about consequentialist theories of ethics. These are all about the consequences. We also talked about non-consequentialist theories of ethics. These are about the duties. What is your duty to do? And also what is the character of the action itself, as opposed to the consequence. And now we're going to talk about a different approach to ethics that doesn't take into account neither the act itself, as deontologists do, Immanuel Kant, nor the consequences, as John Stuart Mill does. Instead, they take a different approach and focus on the individual, focus on the person. Instead of focusing on the character of the consequences or the character of the action itself, they instead focus on the character of the person, on the moral agent doing these actions. So it's about character. It's about building character. When we talk about character, and what is character is just these habits that you, I guess that you practice, that you gain, you modify, and that you perfect over time. Right? So it's these habits. For example, a good person, right? So being good is a virtue. A good person has to do good. It's not enough to go pick up a book right behind me or something, or a dictionary that I have over here, and just read the entries of what good is. Right? I could read all the definitions of good, and that just by reading the definition of good doesn't make me good. I have to actually practice good. Right? So this is what the virtue ethicist takes into account: the practicality, the practice, the experience of being ethical, not just knowing what is right or what is wrong, but actually going through, following through. Um, so I guess this is a good time to give you a distinction that we have in philosophy here between the knowing how and knowing what. So thus far, with non-consequentialist theories, consequentialist theories of ethics, we've been talking about the knowing what is right via the action, or knowing what is right or wrong via its consequences, right, depending on what approach you take. Um, virtue ethics not only asks you for knowing what, but before you knowing what, you know this what is right, what is wrong, namely, by knowing how to do right or wrong, right? By knowing vice or virtues. Right? So virtue is a good character trait, and being vicious, right? Being having vice is a negative character trait. And if you cultivate a virtuous character, then you're doing ethics, then you're doing ethical things, you're doing good things. It's not just knowing good things. Right. All right. So let me look at the textbook here. How the textbook has this set up. I'm just going up top of my head here. So chapter 7. There you go. So virtue ethics. Okay. So Louis Vaughan in the textbook takes the approach of a historical approach and tells you where virtue ethics comes from. We could, in the Western world at least, we could definitely trace this tradition of virtue ethics all the way down to Aristotle. Um, Maybe even Plato and Socrates, but definitely Aristotle is the one that really laid this out. And even contemporary virtue ethicists today have to deal with Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. So we have that. I'm sure, yeah, this chapter has the excerpts of the Nicomachean Ethics, just a couple of pages from that book by Aristotle. Let me see, when was this written? 2000 something BC. So so this was written about 340 BCE, right? So about 2,000 years ago or more. And it's still very relevant, very practical guidelines, not really principles, but very practical advice, really. The background of the Nicomachean Ethics is that Aristotle wrote this for his son, Nicomachus. That's why it's called the Nicomachean Ethics. Right? It's named after the son, Aristotle's son, Nicomachus. And in it, it's just basically Aristotle, like a father, just trying to teach son how to be a good person, how to be a good man, actually. Back then, equality of the sexes was not non-existent, especially in Athens. But, anyways, this book was pretty much just a guideline for Aristotle's son, Nicomachus, to how to be a good man. And it's still one of the most famous virtue ethics pieces of literature ever written, which was written about 2,000 years ago. That's kind of impressive. All right. All right. Nicomachus. So, what is Aristotle's goal? Aristotle is a very important ancient philosopher from Greece. He's actually from Macedonia, but not from Greekland, the mainland Greekland. Anyways, um, he's all about categorizing things. That's like his main thing. The scientific, I guess, approach, the scientific like categories, um, comes from Aristotle, right? So he studied everything, not just ethics, not just metaphysics or logic, but he studied nature, he studied like biology, he studied politics, he studied poetry, he studied everything. He was a very systematic philosopher, basically. Let's put it that way. But in all his works, in all his different kinds of disciplines, his approaches, one goal was eudaimonia. Right? The reason why we do poetry is to try to reach eudaimonia. The reason why we need to understand politics and how power works in society is to reach eudaimonia. The reason why we should understand life, biology, and how animals and plants work is for eudaimonia, for humans to reach eudaimonia. And what is eudaimonia? Uh, the translation is it's usually translated as happiness, but it's I think flourishing is a better translation, right? When you flourish, right? So human flourishing, which also encompasses happiness, but it also encompasses well-being and healthiness, right? Being healthy, right? Not just happy and being comfortable, right? So flourishing, right? Yeah, this is what eudaimonia is. And this he got from his homies, or his teachers, not homies, Plato, and from Plato's teacher, Socrates. So Socrates was really one of the first ones to say that, eudaimonia is what we should be striving at, and that rationality, philosophy is the way towards that. And then Plato and Aristotle take different approaches to eudaimonia. But eudaimonia is the goal here, the target. Nicomachean Ethics, that's his book for ethics, right? So Aristotle wrote a book for poetry called the Poetics. He wrote a book about politics called Politics, right? He wrote a book about metaphysics called Metaphysics, right? You guessed it. He wrote a book about logic called Logic, right? So he wrote about everything, right? And this Nicomachean Ethics is about his ethics, right? So what is ethics for Aristotle? It's a life of virtue. Simple as that. A virtuous life. That's the way you're going to find out what is right, what is wrong. He goes against the belief that there's like certain standards, right? There's universal standards that we could find out through rationality. Or he doesn't dismiss rationality. He's rationally thinking, saying, these trying to find standards like the consequentialists kind of do, or the non-consequentialists kind of do, trying to find a standard of a right or wrong, right? This universal right, wrong action. It's not really possible to begin with, and if it is, it doesn't make you automatically ethical, right? If that was the case, Aristotle says in the Nicomachean Ethics, if that was the case, that if we just knew what was right and wrong, right, even a child who would be able to understand is a prodigy child, a prodigious child, who is able to understand stuff, you can just explain it to him, and would that make him a moral exemplar? Would that make him super moral? Absolutely moral? I doubt it, says Aristotle, right? Just because you know things, right? Again, just knowing what and knowing how. Just because you know things doesn't know actually following through, right? You're actually going through the motions per se. This is also a good way to introduce this word, this vocabulary word. It's not in your textbook, but it's called being a continent, like a continent, like the American continent. But when you apply it to persons, when you apply it to morality and ethics, when someone is continent, someone is well put together. Someone is unified, but only because they are actively suppressing their desires. They really don't want to be that way, but they're just doing it to get by. That's what a continent person is. It's basically just doing the bare minimum of morality just to get by. And yeah, they might not lie, right? They might do their work fine. They might do whatever it is. They might seem virtuous, but it's not because it's in them. It's because they're kind of forced to do it because of society or because of the job they have, and so on and so forth, whatever. So this is what Aristotle is kind of fighting against, right? These other ethical theories, right? You could learn what's right and wrong, supposedly, but you would never be an actually, righteous person, right? You just know what to do in certain situations, right? For Aristotle, he wants to cultivate a righteous, virtuous person. Right? So this is what Aristotle says, straight from the horse's mouth. Happiness is an activity of the soul in accordance with complete or perfect virtue. Right? So happiness, again, was translated here as eudaimonia. Right? So eudaimonia is an activity, right? It's an activity, right? It's not just something you think about and learn. It's an activity. You're doing it, constantly doing it. It's an activity, of the soul in accordance with complete or perfect virtue. So once you learn what virtue is, and you practice those virtues, then you become in accordance with right morality, the rightness, the good, in capital G. So in other words, right, in other simpler words, virtues, they make you good and they help you have a good life. So what is a virtue? Right? We're talking about this word, right? Virtue. We've been throwing this word around so far, this past 15 minutes or so. So what is a virtue? So let's define that. It's pretty important to find out what a virtue is. Let me see. All right. So a virtue is just I'll just read from the textbook, and then I'll explain it in my own words, I guess. Virtue is a stable disposition to act and feel according to some ideal or model of excellence. So a stable disposition to act or feel according to some ideal or model of excellence. Right. So disposition, right, this inclination to act and to feel a certain way, and it's stable, right? It's this inclination, right? You're inclined to help people out just because that's the way you are. That's a virtue, a virtue of generosity, right? To be exact. right? So it's a stable disposition, right? It's a stable character trait. It's a stable habit of someone, right? That forces them, well, not forces them, but that inclines them, right? Kind of corrals them to act one way or another. And it's always in accordance or in a projection of some ideal, right? So being generous. How, right? What is generosity? Right? How do you define that? It's giving your time, giving your money, volunteering. But there's different ways to define it. But once you actually do it, you know what it is, right? Once you actually see a person who is homeless, right? You give them $5, right? Fuck it, right? We actually know what generous is, right? Or I don't know. There was an ethical dilemma in one of the discussion boards about the thief, right? The food thief, right? He goes into your house and steals food. Do you call the cops and press charges, or do you let him have some food because he's hungry, right? Well, right? What kind of disposition? What action are you going to incline towards? Or virtue is going to guide you towards that action, and that virtue is based upon some ideal, some model of excellence, right? Being generous, being honest, benevolent. Um, I don't know. There's many virtues out there. Right? Being rational, it's virtue itself. So it's like this deeply embedded character trait. It's how people are, right? Some people you just know it's like, man, they're assholes. Like, God damn it. Why is he here, right? Or some other people it's like, wow, really nice to see you, because they're all really, really nice people or really cool people, right? People just are that way, right? They have certain character traits that people have that kind of define who they are. And to Aristotle, to virtue ethics, defines their ethical world, universe, right? So it's a deeply embedded character trait, right? That affects countless situations in everyday life. So for Aristotle, there's two kinds of virtues. There's intellectual virtues, and then there's moral virtues. So intellectual virtues are things like wisdom, rationality, as I mentioned right now, um, prudence, right? Not being taking too much risk, being prudent, so being smart, basically. So these are intellectual virtues, right? These are virtues that help you. These are character traits that help you reach wisdom, that help you reach a better understanding of the world, like knowing what. But moral virtues, Aristotle argues, these are virtues such as fairness, being fair, benevolence, right, being good, that's one hand, being honest, right, honesty, loyalty, consensuousness, right, trying to be as organized and clean as possible, right. This being clean also being thinking clean as well, right, consensuousness, and being courageous, right, having courage. All of these are moral virtues. These, it's not enough to know what they are, but you actually have to act them out, right? It's an activity of the soul, as Aristotle says, to know what fairness is, to know what benevolence is, and loyalty and honesty and so on and so forth. So, in other words, Aristotle believes that intellectual virtues, you could teach these things. They could be taught, right? You could just teach them, right? I could just tell you, read this book and you'll learn these intellectual virtues. But moral virtues, you can only learn them through practice. How do you know what honesty is, or how to be honest? Is by actually being honest. Not by just reading a book of honesty, right, or a history of honesty. No, you're actually being honest in your everyday life. That's how you know what honesty is. That's how you know what moral virtues are. Right? So again, intellectual virtues, you could teach them easily. Moral virtues, the only way to learn them is via practice. It's the result of habit, says Aristotle. None of the moral virtue says come by us by nature, right? They're not innate, right? We have to learn these things, right? Children, right? When they come into this earth not knowing right from wrong, right? That's what we all constantly just tell them, no, 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 don't do this, don't do that, right? You have to watch out for them, and then eventually they start learning, right, with practice, right? And then they learn, and then they start questioning their own, parents or whatever they learn from authorities, which is a really good thing, Aristotle says, right? And then they make their own decisions, and this is how a virtuous person goes through, right? First, you're taught, right? You're being taught what to do, and then you do it, and then you question what you're doing and stuff. This is what we call moral understanding, right? It's practical wisdom. It's not intellectual wisdom. It's ethics, right? It's actually practical wisdom. It's a kind of knowing how that requires a lot of training and a lot of experience. Right? If you've never been good in your life, you're not going to be good, says Aristotle. If you grew up with parents that never taught you what's good and wrong, right, and they themselves were not really virtuous people, it's going to be really hard for you to learn what good is in adult life. This is what Aristotle says, because morality is practical wisdom. You take practice. It takes experience and practice. Two things that you need. It's not like geometry, right, or civil engineering, where you learn some formulas, right? You learn some gravity equals, I don't know what the fuck. I'm not a civil engineer, right? Or velocity equals speed times weight or whatever, right? I might be wrong with these formulas. I'm not. I do philosophy, right? But there's these formulas, right? And you just apply these, right, constantly, everywhere, and they should give you the right answer more or less all the time. Right? These formulas are universal, right? Gravity is gravity, whether you go to China or whether you go to Juarez or El Paso. Unless you go to the moon, then gravity fucking changes totally, right, out of space. But in the Earth, right, it's the same thing, right? These formulas are the same thing, right? Newtonian physics works the same thing, whether you're in Thailand or whether you're here in El Paso. Not with ethics, right? This is what Aristotle is saying. Virtue ethicists. It's like, no, it depends on your character traits, and these character traits depends on your civilization, your society. So it's practical wisdom, and it's not just can't just go to the library and learn honesty or learn how to be benevolent. You actually got to do benevolent actions and do honest actions. Right? So it takes into account like the moral complexity of our universe, of our world. Right? It's not just a formula to give you a right or wrong answer. It's much more than that. It's really complex, right? It depends on every situation and on every moral agent, on what kind of virtue they espouse to. And that's one of the problems with virtue ethics that we'll get on right now in a little bit. So basically, long story short, I'm trying to get out here is that any objective standards of morality are non-existent for virtue ethics. Whereas for Kant, right, this deontologist, non-consequentialist, he thinks the opposite. He does think that there are objective, absolute standards of right and wrong. Aristotle doesn't. All right. Another good thing about virtue ethics, it's that it takes into account emotions. So thus far, it's been pretty objective. Our account of morality, right? It's either right or wrong. Right? And how is it right? Because we're rationally thinking about consequences or rationally thinking about the action itself. But virtue ethics is like, okay, that's cool. What about emotions, y'all? Emotions play a heavy role in our acting out of morality, in our ethics. Right? Emotions can help us. For example, there's at least three main ways that emotions can help us be a better moral person or a better moral agent. One of the first ways is that emotions can help us see what is morally relevant, what matters in a given situation. Emotions can help us guide us to figure out what matters in what situation. Remember my ethical dilemma, whether I say my brother or a family of three. More than likely, I'm going to say my brother, because of what? My emotions are going to guide me to what matters the most. I spent so many times, great times with my brother. I love my brother. I have a great relationship with him today. So yeah, you know what I mean. So these are emotions. I just dismiss them. They're irrational. Definitely, it's irrational, right? If we take a utilitarian approach to that ethical dilemma, I'm being irrational and immoral because I'm saving one person, right, my brother, instead of three. But virtue ethics understands that that's not the way the world works. It's not just black and white. Right? There's things called emotions that really tug at us when we act out in our everyday lives. Another way that emotions can help us in this ethics, says virtue ethicists, is that they could help us understand what is right and wrong, right? When you do something wrong, right, you feel guilty, right? This notion of guilt, right, is because you did something wrong, right? And this is shared with with all the animals, right? Basically, right? A cat knows when they did wrong. I mean, they don't care for the most part, fucking cats. But a dog is a perfect example, right? When a dog does wrong, right? When you come back home from work and your dog did something bad, you know he did something bad, right? Just by his eyes and his face, right? They have total faces of guilt when they do bad, or when you tell them no, right? And kids too, children do, right? As well. Right? So emotions, right? These are just emotions, right? When you feel guilty, you feel like this, you don't feel good when you do something wrong, right? You just don't something you're nauseous or something, right? If I guess you've been taught right this way. So emotions, right, in that sense, can help us understand, guide us what is right and what is wrong, right? So we shouldn't just dismiss emotions like the consequentialists and the non-consequentialists do. A third way that emotions can help us out with ethics, they can motivate us to do the right thing. The knowing they could reinforce what we know is right and thus help us make a decision easier, right? Um, Thinking about a dilemma here. Um, the food thief, the guy that steals food from your house, right? It seems kind of out of proportion, right? Disproportionate to call the cops and press charges on this guy just because he's hungry, right? If he doesn't steal nothing else, right? He just goes in there for food. There's your emotions, right? There's something telling you there, right? No, it's not really rational, right? Because he did a crime. Technically speaking, it's a crime. But there's something, beyond rationality that kind of tugs you to be like, no, but there's something there, right? There's something, you know, those, right? That emotion, right? Those things, right? Those emotive circumstances, right? And your head, we got to take into account. You just can't dismiss emotions. And virtue ethics does a really good job at incorporating how these emotions work to define us. Right? These are part of our virtues. How virtues work is via emotions. Right? And this is where I guess you could understand where in the fourth edition of Louis Vaughn's Doing Ethics combines feminist ethics with virtue ethics. Because feminist ethics, for the most part, is that it takes into account emotions. It's a counter argument. It's a counter towards the objective and formulaic and universal approaches of ethics prior to feminist ethics. Right. So for Kant, you got to find what's right and wrong. It's absolute. Do the right thing. Right. For consequentialists, John Stuart Mill, you got to find the benefits. Who's going to benefit the most? Right. Maximize the good. Right. But for feminist ethics and for virtue ethics, right, there's things called emotions that will not give you just a clear black and white answers. You need to take into account how emotions play a large part in our moral everyday life. Right. But we'll talk about feminist ethics in chapter 8 tomorrow at length. so so for virtue ethics, what we're talking about here is right? This moral intelligence, this practical intelligence, right? It's this emotional intelligence, basically. Right? We don't have to be just rational, right? As like philosophers, just pure rationality, but also we're gonna have emotional intelligence to be a good person, to act right. So how do we get this? Right? Training, experience, and practice. That's how we become virtuous. One way is by training, experience, and practice. So again, it takes time to acquire virtues. You just don't learn them. You have to learn through practice. Um, Another way to find out what it is virtue and what is vice is to follow what we call moral exemplars. Moral exemplars. Moral exemplars is pretty much people you look after, right? So, for example, if you're going to be a really good person, your moral exemplar could be Martin Luther King Jr., MLK Jr. He's in the news right now, right? Because of what's going on with the Black Lives Matter. Going to be a good righteous person, I think that's a really good moral exemplar to follow through, right? He was about nonviolence, but he was also about action, right? Civil rights and stuff. Got shot, right, for that in the head, Memphis, 1968. Or Gandhi, right? Another good example, right? Gandhi could be another good moral exemplar, right? It's pretty much just an example of morality for you, and it's in the form of a person. It's embodied as an individual. Your parents could be moral exemplars, or your priest, right? Or your uncle. I don't know, whoever, right? Whoever you look up to, right? Could be used as a moral exemplar. So again, right? It's through via practice, right? So first, this is the way it works. It's moral exemplars in virtue ethics. First, you find a person you think is virtuous, right? Um, I'll take MLK, right? I'm more of a fan of Malcolm X, but let's use MLK to be more neutral, because Malcolm X was super radical. That's my man. But I'm okay, right? That's my moral exemplar. So I have my moral exemplar. I'm my dude. I'm gonna follow through. So I'm gonna emulate. I'm gonna imitate how he acts. I'm gonna try to go to school, get a PhD. I'm gonna try to speak all nice and warm and the way he does, right? I don't do that at all, though, right? But that's the way it works. Where you find an example of morality, person, you just emulate. You practice what they do. Right? Again, it's about practice and experience here. Right? And how do they got it to, right? How did your moral exemplar get their virtuous character, right? It was through practice as well, right? So virtue is all about practice. So that's one way, right? So you got training, right? You got experience, you got practice, you got these moral exemplars, um, right? And then another way to find what virtue is, according to Aristotle, is through the so-called golden mean. The golden mean. What is a golden mean? It's just a balance between two extreme behavioral attitudes, right? So between two behavioral extremes. There we go. Better way to put it. Two behavioral extremes. So in order to find what virtue is, you look for the midpoint between excesses. Right? So you want to find what courage is. So you look for someone who's like really, really cocky, right, or foolhardiness, right? That is like too courageous. That doesn't care about his own life or that of others. Or just going to risks without even thinking about it. That's too much, right? It's excessive. Or someone who's a coward, right? Doesn't have no courage. So you look at two of those extremes, the coward and the foolhardy person, and you look for the midpoint. And you look for be courage, vice, right? Or you look for the virtue of honesty. What is honesty? So you look for the excesses, behavioral extremes. So the opposite of honesty would be like lying, right? And the other extreme would be being too blunt, being way too straightforward, where you become kind of like an asshole, right? Sometimes you don't have to be honest all the time because you might be hurting people's feelings, right? So someone who's really, really blunt doesn't care about feelings, just cares about honesty, right? Or someone who lies all the time. Find the golden mean, find the midpoint. You find what virtue of honesty is, according to Aristotle. Okay, so there's different ways to find what virtue is, right? There's a moral exemplar, right? The person you think is a virtuous person, you act like them, try to be like them, or this golden mean. Either way, they all depend on training, experience, and practice. Right? So a life of moderation is what the golden mean gives us, right? Again, the emphasis in virtue ethics is on the quality of character, on the quality of your virtues, and not on some blind adherence to some standard or some principles, right? So before, we've been talking about the principle of utility, the principle of psychological egoism, the principle of the categorical imperative, right? The principle of universality. All these principles, right? Virtue ethics, like, nah, you just kind of adopt these principles and apply them blindly to every situation. Morality is more complex than that. Right? But we need to look instead to find out what morality is character traits, is persons, how persons are trained, how their experiences are given them, and how they practice these virtues. All right. So that's virtue ethics. So let's talk about some objections, some criticisms of virtue ethics. And just like all the rest of the ethical theories we talked about, there's many criticisms against it. Okay? Let me see. And I'll just try to go over this really quickly. So I'm actually getting kind of hungry now. All right. So one of the first criticisms is called the so-called tragic dilemma. So let me give you this tragic dilemma. It's a famous book by William Styron called Sophie's Choice. I don't know if you guys ever read it or heard about it. So I think it's a movie too. Sophie's Choice. It's held in Nazi Germany during the Holocaust, and there's this Jewish woman who Sophie, and she has two children, and she's in a concentration camp, and they're giving her a choice to choose one of her children to save, and the other one is to be killed. Right, so you have to choose one child of the two children that she has. A lot of she's there. And then the other one's gonna be killed, but she could save one, but she has to choose which one. Right? And as a mother, holy fuck, this is a hard choice, right? How can you choose one child out of both your children to save, knowing that the other one is gonna be killed? Or the other choice, and Sophie's choice here, right, is that you refuse to choose either one, and thus both of them get killed. This is Sophie's choice. This is a tragic dilemma here. Virtue ethics is not really helpful here. Right? So even though it's coherent, and even though virtue ethics definitely aligns with our common sense experience, right? This is the basic criteria that we have set up for a good ethic theory. The third criteria, usefulness, fruitfulness, that's questionable. How useful virtue ethics really is. And this tragic dilemma here, Sophie's choice, illustrates that. Right? So what would the virtue ethics theory help us here to choose? What choice are we going to make? Right? It seems like if we choose to save one kid out of the other, right, and others being killed, that seems wrong, right? That doesn't seem virtuous at all, right? And what about the other choice? If you don't choose at all, you refuse to play the game, right, of these Nazi bastards. Your children are still being killed, both of them now, not just one. That doesn't seem virtuous either, right? It seems kind of not courageous, right? Seems kind of, like a coward, right? But either way, right, is not virtuous, right? None of these choices are good, and virtue theory cannot really account for this, right? So, oh, we'll change the batteries right now. So yes, so this tragic dilemma, right? Virtue ethics here is kind of useless. Some virtue ethicists have responded to this particular tragic dilemma by saying that taking either choice is virtuous, it's courageous enough. So that is virtue in itself. But I'm not really convinced with that counter argument. But yeah, the tragic dilemma, right? What choice would you make? Choose one kid and kill the other, or choose nothing and kill both? Holy crap, right? And this, meaning, did happen during in the concentration camps. Terrible things happened. Terrible. The Nazis did terrible things to the Jewish people, and the Gypsies, and the mentally disabled. I mean, they killed 6 million people. Right? And it seems like we're going that way again. Anyways, all right. So yeah, so moral guidance, right? Does it really give us moral guidance, virtue ethics? That's a little bit questionable. Does it really give us enough guidance to help us with these moral puzzles here, these moral dilemmas? Some say yes, some say no. Say hi to people. Hey, hi, dudes. So my daughter's gonna join us towards the end now. All right, so usefulness, not really that useful, right? It depends, right? It was just situation, of course, right? I guess that's the best answer for like a philosophy class. It depends. But also you gotta back it up with premises and justify it. Why does it depend? Because this, and that. Okay. All right. Another criticism lodged against virtue ethics is that it is too demanding, right? So I said that my moral exemplar was MLK Jr., Martin Luther King Jr. But dude, I'm not gonna be Martin Luther King ever. I mean, I'm already 32 years old. That guy was shot, I think, at this age, 32. I don't want to be shot, that's for sure. I never want to be shot in the head by a sniper. Hell no, that would be terrible. Way to go. But I'm not gonna be no MLK. I'm not gonna have streets named after me in most major cities of the U.S. Never. Even as much as I try, I'm never gonna be that, right? Or some people say Gandhi is a good moral exemplar. Yes, he is, but he was also a sexual predator. But anyways, just like MLK too. Anyways, we're never gonna be that, right? So is ethics, right, following this moral exemplar, is that too demanding and thus useless, right? Because obviously not everybody's gonna be their moral exemplars, right? Right. I said that Malcolm X, right, is one of my moral models, right? Yeah, no, I'm not gonna be the next Malcolm X. I would have loved to, but I didn't have the education, I didn't have the experience, and I didn't have all that he became. Right? I'm living totally different circumstances, right? And these people were just really, really virtuous, right? MLK dedicated his whole life for civil rights, just like Malcolm X. Literally their whole lives, right? They both got shot, right? Gandhi, right? The same thing, dedicated his whole life for human rights. Right? Am I doing that? Nah, during the weekends, I like to go out and drink. I don't fast like Gandhi does, right? I don't go on hunger strikes, right? I do organize marching here and there, right? And I'll try my best to attend these protestas, but I'm no Malcolm X, I'm no MLK, I'm no Gandhi, right? So that, how useful is that? The moral exemplars. This is a criticism. It's lodged against virtue ethics. You know. Um, but yeah, I'll leave that up to you, right? I do believe that we should look up to these people, right? And it's up to you who you want to look up to, right? I have my own set of people that I look up to. Right? I have certain professors that I emulate, certain famous individuals, right? Malcolm X, Franz Fanon, um, Hunter S. Thompson. You guys know who that is. Um, but yeah, doesn't mean I'm going to become them, right? but we should still strive to become virtuous nonetheless. Right? It's practice. At the end of the day, virtue ethics is all about practice. And then also with these moral exemplars, right? How do we choose them, right? So for me, Malcolm X is my moral exemplar. Somebody who's a white person in the South fucking hates Malcolm X, right? Or the Black Panthers, right? Another heroes of mine, right? Huey Newton, right? Angela Davis, still alive. I actually got to meet her. That's fucking amazing. Some people hate those people, like hate them, right? Want to kill them, actually, right? So my moral exemplars, may not be the same as yours, right? Some people might think that Hitler is a moral exemplar. People do think that way today, even today in this world, especially in this world right now, right? Or Stalin on the other gamut of that spectrum, right? Both of them were authoritarian dictators that killed millions of people, right? Who's right? Is Malcolm X a better example than Stalin or Hitler? That's right, subject to the person, right? It's subjective, right? It's relative, right? There's no objective standard there, right? So again, so what's good? What's right? How useful is this, right? This is again the problem of relativism that virtue ethics has here. So, all right, and then another problem with virtue ethics is also this conflicting duties. Just like Kant has this problem, virtue ethics has this problem too. Think about this dilemma. You're on vacation and you see your best friend's husband making out and getting really close with this young girl, right? And they're married, right? And you haven't heard any issues with their marriage. What do? Do you go and be a snitch, right? Be a snitch and you tell your best friend, "Hey, I saw your husband, being really close with this young girl over here when I was on vacation in Cancun or wherever, Bahamas, wherever you want to go." Or do you not mind other people's business, right? That's also a virtue. Right? Mind your own business, right? It's not really attractive, morally attractive, to be in everybody's business and be a tattletale, right? To be a snitch, basically, right? What do you do here, right? Virtue ethics has a conflicting duty here. There's two conflicting duties or two conflicting virtues, right? Not being a snitch, right? Staying away from people's business, or being honest, right? What do you do? Virtue ethics kind of not really too helpful here, right? Or another ethical dilemma to illustrate this point of conflicting virtues. Your friend is on trial, right? He's on being judged. He's on trial for some really bad crime, right? And your friend's not that way, right? But there's all this evidence, right, that the prosecutor are giving you. What do, right? Do you actually try to protect your friend, loyalty, right? The virtue of loyalty, or you're honest and be like, you know what? He is kind of creepy. I never thought about it before, but now you bring it up. He had these kind of tendencies before, right? So what do? You give up your friend on trial and be honest, or you stay loyal to your friend, right? These are two conflicting virtues: loyalty and honesty. Virtue ethics has no straightforward way to reconcile these conflicts or these contradictions. Right? So that's a big critique on virtue ethics. And one final critique, right? Because we go on and on with these things, right? Is the so-called priority problem. The priority problem, right? So the best way to illustrate this critique against virtue ethics is to back to Euthyphro, Plato's Euthyphro. So I really hope you guys read that text. It was on chapter 2, I believe, the chapter on relativism, objectivism, and emotivism. And the story goes like this, right? This Socrates is going to trial, and he bumps into Euthyphro, who is the the master priest. He's the big priest, right? The master priest of Athens. And Socrates has a question. Right? He wants to find out what is faithfulness. What does it mean to be pious, to be faithful? And Eutrophil, right? He's supposed to know this stuff. He's the master priest, right? He tells them, easy, Socrates. It's what the gods do. It's what the gods think is right. That's the right thing to do. So divine command theory, in other words. This is Eutrophil. Eutrophil is illustrating the divine command theory. It's what the gods think is right. But if you read Greek mythology, these gods are always fighting against each other, actually trying to kill each other and sleeping with each other's wives and stuff. So if one god does something, the other god is doing the opposite thing. So what is right if different gods doing different things, completely contradicting each other, killing each other, right? And Eutrophil doesn't really give a good answer to this, right? So this is what virtue ethics has, right? The same structure, the same circular structure that divine command theory has, right? It's arbitrary, again, right? It's really, really relative to the subject, to the individual person, right? It's super arbitrary, right? Let me put it another way, right? This is the priority problem. Is a virtue a virtue because a virtuous person does it? Or does a virtuous person become virtuous because they know what virtue is? This is a circular problem. What it is? What is it? Right? So let me find it here where it's better put here. Yeah. So it's virtue based on the virtuous person, but how did that virtuous person gain the virtue? You know what I mean? It begs the question. Right? It's begging the question here. And again, it doesn't give you what virtue is really. It's just based upon practice and experience, and it's very gray. It's very open-ended. Right? So this is the priority problem. What is the nature of virtue? Basically, virtue ethics doesn't really give you that, right? Because it begs the question. So let me give you the problem here, as the textbook has it. Are people virtuous because they perform right actions, or are actions right because virtuous people perform those actions? So again, let me give you that problem again. It's a circular problem, right? It's begging the question. Are people virtuous because they perform right actions, or are actions right because virtuous people perform them? Right? This is the problem with Referral, right? Is being faithful because the gods do it, or piety is the other way around, right? Is that piety was already there and gods just followed that thing, right? What is it? What is the nature of that? What is the nature of virtue? Virtue ethics doesn't really give you a straight answer for that. All right, and that's pretty much all I want to talk about for virtue ethics now. That was a long lecture. But just to recap, right, it's all about experience. It's all about training, experience, and practice. Right? Ethics is not you just don't read it in the book, right? Or find out what it is. You need to find out how to be ethical. And how do you find out to be ethical? Just two main ways. The moral exemplars, you find out a model of excellence and you emulate that. You practice how they are. Or the golden mean. You look for two behavioral extremes and look for the midpoint. And then I talked about all the criticisms against virtue ethics, right? Again, there's no perfect ethical system, but there is some advantages, some lessons to take away from, and from these things, both good and bad lessons. All right, so this is the end of chapter 7, right? Chapter 8, next chapter will be feminist ethics. really my favorite chapter, the whole book. I think feminist ethics is really relevant, very important, and I'm glad that the new edition dedicated a whole chapter to it and not just a section of it, like the last edition, the fourth edition. So if you don't have the fifth edition, I strongly recommend you see the lectures because I'll go over feminist ethics and I'll expand more because that's kind of my expertise area is feminist ethics when it comes to ethics. This is what I follow is feminist ethics. So anyways, next chapter will be feminist ethics, and thank you for joining me today. And y'all stay safe, and we'll see you next.